Hello and welcome to the Asshole Book Club. Today I'm going to be reading from the Cheese Book. I'm going to be learning about cheese. Seems pretty straightforward. Hold on. Freaking tangled up wire. Alright. Before I get started, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who has subscribed so far. And everyone who has left a comment. And yes, I've started taking allergy meds, so yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Still a little sniffy, but I don't think allergy meds have an immediate effect, so I'll just be taking them every day. Alright. I was gonna skip the first chapter, but, might as well read it. Chapter 1, Cheese, the Wine of Foods. As between mice and men, man is easily the more devoted to cheese, and always has been. The mouse, scientists have found, will content himself with cheese for want of something better, but his real passion is for gumdrops. Okay. But men have loved cheese for thousands of years, every kind of cheese, from the simple fresh country cheeses that have graced the poor man's table since biblical times, to the exquisite worldly cheeses that are the essence of a luxury, of cream within cream within cream. Cheese has been described as milk's leap to immortality, and as the food that most resembles wine. For cheese, like wine, is a preserve, and it bears the same relation to milk as wine bears to grapes. Like wine, it has countless varieties, and because of dissimilarities in grasses and herbs, waters, and climate, no two cheeses, however similar, can be identical if they are made in different places. A master cheesemaker with all his secrets and skills can be moved to another locality and will be unable to make the same cheese. This has not kept people from trying. They have tried to make camembert in Britain and Stilton in the United States, with dismal results. But sometimes a so-called imitation turns out better than the original. And sometimes an entirely new and great cheese is produced. As in the case of Liederkranz, in fact, the story of cheesemaking is a long history of imitation, ever since the first cheeses were made. Many different lands claim the discovery of cheese as their own, and they all have legends, told with countless local variations which have these elements in common. A rider sets out on a journey, taking with him some milk in a leathern pouch made from a young cow's stomach. Hours later, he discovers that the milk has turned into a sour, curdy substance that is not unpalatable. Today, we know that rennet, which is made from rennin, an enzyme found in the lining of a calf's stomach, is the agent that quickly converts milk into curds and whey, and is almost universally used in cheesemaking. But the legend grew up long after the fact, for cheese actually dates back to the earliest domestication of animals, at about 9000 BC. And it has been made wherever animals produce more milk than people use in fluid form. Archaeologists have discovered that cheese was well known to the Sumerians, 4000 BC, whose cuneiform tablets contain references to cheese, as do the Egyptian and Chaldean artifacts. It is as much a staple of the Old Testament as honey and almonds and wine, and is associated with stories of great daring. David was delivering 10 cheeses to Saul's camp when he encountered Goliath. And with great despairing, thou hast poured me out as milk, says Job, and curdled me as cheese. Wow. I didn't know cheese had such religious significance. The ancient Greeks had a deity, Aristeus, son of Apollo, who was considered the giver of cheese, and Homer sang of cheese in the Odyssey. Thus we read how Ulysses discovered the Cyclops' cheese racks loaded with cheese, and how he and his men devoured them. When Polyphemus returned, he sat down and milked his ewes and goats, all in due course. Then he curdled half the milk and set it aside in wicker baskets. Those wicker baskets for the draining of cheeses were known to Greeks as formos, the word which became forma in Latin, and from which came the Italian word for cheese, formaggio, and early French fromage, which later became fromage. From the Latin caseus for cheese comes the German word case, the Dutch kaas, the Irish kaas, Welsh kaas, Portuguese queijo, and Japanese, and Spanish queso. I don't know where I saw Japanese. In Anglo-Saxon, it was cease or cice, which later became cheese. The Greeks were so fond of cheese that they rewarded their children with it as we give ours candy, and little cheese was a special term of endearment. Their Olympic athletes also trained on a diet consisting mostly of cheese. The island of Delos engraved a cheese on its coins, and the island of Samos was noted for cheesecakes, for which Athenaeus even gives us a recipe. Take some cheese and pound it, put in a brazen sieve, and strain it. Then add honey and flour made from spring wheat, and heat the whole together into one mass. Wedding cakes of that early area were almost invariably cheesecakes, and at Argos it was customary for the bride to bring little cakes that were roasted, covered with honey, and served to the bridegroom's friends. A delicious sounding variation was tunai, small cheesecakes that were deep fried, then covered with honey, of which the playwright Mayrus wrote about 500 BC. Have you never seen fresh tunai hissing when you pour honey over them? Ancient Romans, too, knew a great variety of cheeses. You guys are going to be hearing me say the word cheese a lot, by the way. So if you don't want to hear that, I don't know, you clicked on a video about the cheese book, sorry. Which played such an important part in Roman diet that the rich had special kitchens for cheesemaking, while the rest of the populace brought their cheese to public smokehouses for curing. Like the Greeks, they also used little cheese as an affectionate diminutive. They ate it with fruit, about which Virgil wrote so invitingly, "Yet this night you might have rested here with me on this green leafage. We have ripe apples, mealy chestnuts, and a wealth of pressed cheeses." And in the 2nd century, Lucius Apuleius wrote that Hypatia, I'm probably butchering all of these names, sorry, the principal city of Thessaly, was so renowned as a place for fresh cheeses of exceeding good taste and relish, that traders used to journey there to buy cheese and honey for resale. Cheeses traveled far from their native lands in the knapsacks of soldiers, from Caesar's legions to the armies of Genghis Khan, who carried it with them as a mainstay, and as have armies ever since. Whew. Another traveler, Marco Polo, brought back from the East this report of what well may have been the earliest method of preserving cheese. They make provision also of milk thickened and dried to the state of a paste, which is prepared in the following manner. They boil the milk, skimming off the rich or creamy part as it rises to the top. Put it into a separate vessel as butter, for as long as that remains in the milk it will not become hard. The latter is then exposed to the sun until it dries. Upon going in service, they carry with them about 10 pounds for each man, and of this, half a pound is put every morning into a leathern bottle with as much water as is thought necessary. By their motion in riding, the contents are violently shaken, and a thin porridge is produced, upon which they make their dinner. So far, we have been speaking of the simpler cheeses, fresh cheeses like our cottage cheeses of today, which are followed by the hard-pressed cheeses like Parmesan and Emmenthal. And also the veined cheeses like Gorgonzola and Roquefort. They were known almost 1,000 years ago. Far more complicated were the host of elaborate cheeses that came out of the monasteries in Middle Ages. The soft ripening cheeses for which France is noted, they are among the most urban cheeses in existence, and their development marked an important turning point in the art of cheesemaking. For all that has been prized through the ages, cheese has not had a history of universal acceptance. Renaissance and Elizabethan physicians wrote polemics against it, and Shakespeare's references to cheese almost always reflect distaste. Among other things, cheese was thought to have almost occult powers. Cheese, it is a peevish elf, wrote John Ray in 1670. It digests all things but itself. People often became so suspicious of it that, wholesome or not, cheese had the power to make them ill. And the superstitions that clung to it, particularly during the 16th and 17th centuries, are best summed up by legend recounted by Horace Annesley Vachal about a boy, which is the legend we will read now. Let's see. Whose birth took place in a rocky cave near the peak of Derbyshire. As a child, he could make a hearty breakfast of pebbles. When other boys ate cherry pie, he was content to be apportioned the stones. Later on, he served oysters to his guests and ate the shells. Marbles were a bonne bouche. Bigger boys used to pick him up and shake him to hear the marbles rattling in his stomach. But to his dying day, he swore solemnly that he could not digest cheese. Nevertheless, by the 19th century, cheese regained its respectability almost as spontaneously as it had lost it. The change in attitude was not marked by any particular event. Pasteurization, for example, was unheard of until the late 19th century, and even then it was applied to milk to be used for drinking. But hardly at all to the making of cheese. All we know is that the cheeses revered in the Old Testament, whose praises the Greeks sang, the cheeses that were prized for centuries after suddenly fell into disfavor, and just as uncountably a few hundred years later were received back. their good reputation restored. And that is chapter 1. Whew. Very wordy. What was that? Oh my gosh. I think I just took like 2 screenshots while trying to check the time. Just turn off. Sorry. Chapter 2. How cheese is made. Hold on. I'm going to take this plastic thing off. All cheese is made from milk, usually cow's milk, but also from the milk of sheep, goats, and other animals, including buffalo, whose milk is still used in making mozzarella in Italy, camels, asses, reindeer, and even yaks. To make cheese, something must be done to the milk to cause it to separate and form into curds, which are white milky lumps of the consistency of soft custard, and whey, the thin cloudy liquid that remains after the curds have formed. This separation is brought about by adding rennet to the milk or by means of a starter, which is a culture made of bacteria. And as we read earlier, rennet is a thing found in calf stomach. The addition of either of these to the milk creates a small storm within it. The sort of thing you may have noticed if you've ever poured whiskey or brandy into milk and seen it look as if it were about to curdle, a reaction that in a moment subsides as the milk absorbs the spirits. In cheese making, the milk cannot absorb the rennet or starter, and so after a moment it literally goes to pieces. The milk may or may not be heated before or during the time the starter is added. It may or may not be skimmed first, and it may or may not have extra cream added. It may be the milk of one milking only, or it may be the morning's milk combined with the milking of the previous morning. A few degrees more or less in the temperature to which the milk is heated will produce distinct differences in the cheeses, as will the way in which the curds are cut. They may be cut into pieces as small as sugar lumps, or as large as sandwich loaves, or combed into long, thin strips with a cheese harp, as in the case of Swiss. Not only the size and shape of the cutting instrument, but the motion that is used in cutting the curd will help decide the kind of cheese that will result. After the curds are cut or broken up by one means or another, they may not be drained thoroughly or hardly at all. They may be salted or not. They may be pressed or not. They may or may not be inoculated or their surfaces sprayed with some kind of mold. They may be put to ripen in a warm, moist place or in a cool, dry one. They may rest on mats or in baskets, or left in hoops or under weights for further pressing. Even small variations in temperature and other atmospheric conditions in the ripening place will change the cheese. And so, of course, will the length of time that it ripens. It may be days or months, but each day will make a difference. Whether the cheese is rubbed with salt, or washed in brine, or something else. Maroilles, for example, is bathed in beer, will also make a difference. And so will the number of times the cheese is turned from one side to another while it ripens. Even one small difference in a single step can produce a cheese quite different than the one the cheesemaker may have started out to make. And this is one reason we have so many different cheeses. To the cheesemaker, the capriciousness of the whole process may suggest a prevalence of witches. Consider what can happen when the friendly bacteria is used in certain kinds of cheesemaking. Refuse to cooperate. Oh, the bacteria refuses to cooperate. When the Borden's Liederkranz plant was moved from Upper New York State to Van Wert, Ohio, all the original equipment was taken to the new plant, as was the mother culture used in starting it, and the secret formula used in making it. With all this went a small contingent of cheesemakers who had been making Liederkranz for years. Everything, in fact, was moved to Ohio except the shell of the old plant itself. Operations were resumed in the new plant and everything was done the same way, but the cheese was different. They tried again and again, but they simply could not duplicate the Liederkranz they had been making before. Finally, they took some Liederkranz cheeses made in the old plant and smeared them all over the new tile walls. That done, the cheese came out right. No one had realized till then that the curds had been affected just as much by bacteria floating free in the air as by the cultures that were mixed directly into them. This kind of problem is by no means unusual, and though a great deal of scientific research is being focused upon cheesemaking, the most sophisticated dairy technologists will be quick to admit that they do not understand why certain things happen in cheesemaking. Their primary concern is to find ways to make it happen again and again, the desirable things that do happen. All this suggests that cheesemaking is complicated, and it is. It can also be as simple as heating some sour milk, the starter is not even needed if it is sour enough, and scooping out the resulting curds to be drained in cheesecloth. This is the simplest way of making cheese, and the result is, of course, the simplest kind of cheese. The fresh pot cheese that goes back to biblical times. To arrive at a more complicated cheese, you may require a sailor's cow, a bundle of scented alpine grasses for her breakfast, an ancient press, a drafty cave, and the guidance of a Benedictine monk. Alright. And that's the chapter on how cheese is made. I'm not sure I fully know how to make cheese now, but hey. What's the time? I think we will read one more chapter. Chapter 3. Keeping the names straight. Hundreds of cheeses are named for the places in which they were first made. Cheddar, Edam, Camembert, Gorgonzola, for example, are almost all the French blues. Oh, and almost all the French blues. Bleu d'Auvergne, Bleu d'Auvergne, Bleu de Cassis, Bleu de Limousin, de Bresse. Many other cheeses are named for the city or town in which they are first marketed, like Limburger, Stilton, or Parmesan. The sound of the name and the presence of certain prefixes or suffixes will also give a clue to the origin. Names of cheeses from Spanish-speaking countries are commonly prefaced by the word queso, meaning cheese, as in queso Serra, queso Cabrales, or queso Cabrales. I thought there was going to be more. Just as many cheeses from Yugoslavia, Montenegro, and thereabouts are prefixed by Sir or Seer, in Norway and Sweden, cheese names commonly end with ost, which also means cheese. For example, Nokelost, Gamelost, Jetost, Primost, Kumino. and Kuminost. Denmark in 1956 decided to rename all major cheeses to make them sound more authentically Danish. As a result, most of the better-known Danish cheeses end with the suffix bo, starting with Danbo, which means one who lives in Denmark, and Finbo, for the island of Funen. And on through Elbo, Tybo, Molbo, and Maribo. Thus, cheeses whose names end with ost or bo are immediately recognizable as Scandinavian. Or else the name of the cheese may refer to some ingredient mixed with it, as in papato, an Italian cheese that is studded with pieces of black peppercorns. Others others are Nagel, nail in German, named for the spikes of clove and caraway that are mixed throughout the cheese. Kümmelkäse for caraway, sage for the herb, and grappe, the French dessert cheese that is covered with dried grape seeds. Or a cheese's shape may give it its name. Thus, from Greece, we have kefalotiri, which is shaped like a Greek hat or kefalo. Hand cheese, which is pressed into its final shape by hand. The Italian Caciocavallo, which some maintain got its name because two cheeses are often tied together and hung over a pole, as if astride a horse. Provo, which means oval in Italian, and which becomes provolone if it is large, or in the smaller size, provolette or provolatine. There is brick cheese, which was originally shaped and pressed with bricks. Pineapple cheese, whose rind is scored to resemble the fruit in texture as well as shape. And ovoli, the small egg-shaped mozzarella. Or cheese may be named for the milk it is made from. Pecorino is a generic first name for all Italian cheeses made with sheep's milk, just as chèvre is the name for French goat cheeses. Double Gloucester refers to Gloucester breed of black cattle whose milk was originally used, and to the extra large size of this cheese. Or a cheese may be named for its maker, like Gervais, originally a brand name and now commonly used as a generic name for this type of French cream cheese. Or Bleu de Lacaille, first made by Antonio Russell Lequel in 1854. Petite Suisse, another French cream cheese, was named for the young Swiss cowherd who first suggested adding a little fresh cream to the curds of the local cheese. His advice was followed, and the result was a cream cheese that is one of the softest and fluffiest of them all. Cheeses are also named for the things that go with or are used for. For instance, Bercasse, a cheese strong enough to hold its own with any brew, and raclette, a Swiss cheese named for a melted cheese dish called raclette. And then there is that great group of cheeses made originally by monks, whose names have a decidedly ecclesiastical ring. Pont-l'Evêque, Port-Salut, Munster, Trappist, and a roll call of saints. Saint Pauline, Saint Florentine, Saint Claude, Saint Benoit, among others, as might befit the Last Judgment. Okay. And we're now on part 2 of the book, and I'll end it there. Wow. Sorry I butchered so many cheese names. if you made it this far, thank you so much for tuning in to me reading about cheese. Please leave a like, go ahead and subscribe, and comment down below what you think of cheese. What's your favorite cheese? Have you ever made cheese yourself? I don't know. Anyway, I'm gonna go, I don't know, look for cheese to eat. Have a good day, everyone, and I will see you later. Hey da.